this is really what we're going to talk about. Was Shakespeare a Catholic? Why does it matter? Spoiler alert, yes he was, almost certainly. Why does it matter? That should become obvious if it isn't already so. Right, next. This is the outline of the talk. We need to start by talking about the historical context. There's no point at all talking about Shakespeare. You can't even begin to understand Shakespeare unless you understand his life and times and the very, very peculiar age, the very unusual set of circumstances into which he was born. So we need to talk about that. Then we will talk about the man himself, and then we will look at his writings, and the why it matters, I think, will be obvious right the way throughout. If there's one thing that makes this talk long, it'll be that I do actually want to look at a bit of actual Shakespeare and read it through with you and discuss it, which will take time, because I'd rather that you can see things for yourself and not have to take my word for it with any of this. The biographical information that we have of him is fascinating as well. And the historical context will be familiar to many of you, but it's worth just going through and spelling it out. Now, I want to say, first of all, before we go any further, I do not consider myself to be an expert on this topic by any means. There are a great many people out there who know this sort of material inside out, back to front, and are far more familiar with Shakespeare than I am. So I feel rather inadequate faced with the task. However, it's one of those things that, even though it's talked about now more than it used to be, it still can't be talked about enough. And as G.K. Chesterton says, if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. So I'm going to do this badly. There will be opportunity to ask questions at the end. I can't guarantee that I will know the answer to it. We'll see how it goes. Okay? If there are any Shakespeare experts among you, then I beg your forgiveness in advance. Okay. Right. Next, please.
Mr. Taylor, might want to take your crown.
Oh no, I want to wear my crown. Yeah. Yeah. LFSPN Christmas party. Right. Right. This is the so-called Protestant Reformation in England. This map I got from you can see there, the National Archives, showing all the monasteries. In fact, I think not all the religious houses are on that map. I think that's just the bigger monasteries. Before Henry VIII, not only every city, every town, quite a lot of the villages, anywhere of any size, you had your local monastery or religious house. And some of them were massive, great big places like Fountains Abbey, where you might have 100, 200, 300 monks. There were other places where it might be just a little priory, and you have sort of 3 Franciscan friars living there. But it's religious houses all over England. Some of you will know this. England was known as the Isle of Saints in the period after the Romans and up to the start of the Middle Ages. And it's known as Our Lady's Dowry because it was actually officially given to her by the state and by the bishops. Okay, this is then the period that we need to be familiar with. So this is Henry VIII's reign. The slides I got are basically, I used this for a lesson and I'm just reusing them. I'm being lazy. So feel free to call out any answers if you know it. When is the Act in Restraint of Foreign Appeals? Does anybody know? It's 1 year before, so it's 1533. And what it means, in effect, the Act in Restraint of Foreign Appeals, the entire Protestant Reformation in England, what's unusual about it compared to Germany is it's all done through the law. It's all done by passing laws against various things. This Act makes it, this is Henry VIII, it makes it not just illegal, it makes it actually treason to appeal to any authority outside of England. Now, in practice, who's that going to affect? What's that going to mean? It means the Pope. It means, in effect, in matters to do with your religion, it can go as high as the king and no further because you're committing treason. Okay, the following year, we have 2 acts. The Act of Supremacy and the Act of, anybody?
Conformity?
No. Begins with an S. The Act of Succession. Okay, Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth is now going to be the legitimate heir, so it legitimizes her even though she's not really legitimate. Okay, the Act of Succession. 1535, the following year, for refusing to sign those acts, there are 2 very famous martyrs in this country, one a bishop, one a layman. Anybody?
Fisher.
Fisher and More, yes. Thomas More, St. Thomas More and St. John Fisher. They're canonised on the 400th anniversary, 1935. Okay, the Act of 10 Articles, 1536. The 10 articles in question are, here is what thou shalt believe. Eventually it will turn into the 39 articles, but it's stuff that really officially makes the so-called Church of England Protestant, and it's stuff that no Catholic can ever accept. So it's things like the Pope of Rome hath no jurisdiction within this realm of England, and the Church of Rome hath erred, and that kind of thing. Okay. Now, the Pilgrimage of Grace is where large portions of the population, ordinary people in the north, it's a literal kind of peasants' uprising. It's a Catholic crusade because of what's happening at the same time, something to do with the monasteries. They don't like their monasteries being under attack. What's going on? 1536 to 1540, anybody? The dissolution of the monasteries, as it's euphemistically called. Okay. Henry VIII dies in what year? Does anyone know?
1547.
Thank you very much. 1547 is the death of Henry VIII, and Edward becomes king. He's still a boy, so he has a council of these guys who are going to run the kingdom for him, but they are absolutely no good. They're the worst people imaginable. Thomas Cranmer is one of them, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who famously kept a wife in secret. Knowing Henry VIII didn't approve of married clergy, he married her in secret in Germany. William Cobbett says he brought her into England in a box with holes drilled in it like a coffin, so that she wouldn't suffocate, and then kept this wife in secret. And as soon as Henry VIII died, he passed a law saying clergy can now marry from now on, having already been secretly married. Somerset is another one. They're the worst. And okay, so then we have Edward VI is nominally the king. 2 years later then, Cranmer brings out this new Protestant communion service that's going to replace the Mass in all the parish churches. Okay, 1549, it's the Book of Common Prayer, is what it's called. And the Western Rising occurs. If you ever get a chance, look into the Western Rising. It's amazing. It's an epic. It's kind of like the Vendée uprising, but in England. The entire Devon, Cornwall, Somerset, they all rose up. They said, we're not having this, and they send a petition to London saying, you guys are heretics and we want the Mass in Latin. And enough with this silly service, which is like a Christmas game. Anyway, brilliant. And there are similar risings around the rest of the country, and it's put down on the end of a sword by, if you please, foreign mercenaries. They don't even they kill, and they even kill people who surrender. They just butcher them all using foreign troops. This is the government in London. It's ruthless. Okay, they will stop at nothing. Okay, and then Edward VI dies, and Mary Tudor, under the will of Henry VIII, it has to be Elizabeth who succeeds, but then Mary Tudor is going to be the second one after Elizabeth. She's second in line to the throne. They don't want that because they know she's a Catholic. Mary, the daughter of Henry and his only real wife, Catherine of Aragon, remains stubbornly Catholic throughout this. She is a heroic lady. Please God, she'll be made a saint one day, Mary Tudor. And they don't want her to become queen, so they have the... Does anybody know the name of this plot? The 3 words are the person in question that they want to put in. I think it's the daughter of Somerset, actually. It is Lady Jane Grey, exactly, yes, well done. It's Lady Jane Grey plot. It doesn't work because there's such a popular groundswell of support for Mary. And she becomes the monarch. Cardinal Pole, I gather it's pronounced, it's spelt Pole, is her cousin. His mother was the sister of Henry VIII. Not many people realise this. Henry VIII had a sister who is, I think, a blessed, not a saint, but still, she's a blessed. And I think she's a martyr of the Protestant Reformation. Margaret Pole. Blessed Margaret Pole, Henry VIII's sister, is the mother of Cardinal Pole. So Queen Mary, the reigning monarch, and her cousin, who becomes the sort of Cardinal Archbishop Primate, they're going to bring the Catholic religion back to England. Now, as it turns out, they didn't have a lot of time to do it in. But right at this point in time, the Council of Trent has just happened, and one of the things to come out of the Council of Trent is that from now on we're going to have seminaries. So, and the Catholic world is just adjusting to this. You can't bring a seminary into existence just like that overnight. It takes time to put it all together. And in fact, England is the first country anywhere in the world in history that's going to have a seminary to train priests. So they're putting it together. The bricks and mortar building that it takes place in is almost the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle. You have to work out the whole syllabus and who's going to be teaching what and all of that. They do all the kind of work of putting it together, and then both of them die. Mary dies and Cardinal Poole dies. Now, there's various theories if you look about what did she die of cancer and this and that. I think, without giving a definite answer, I think it's fair to say the deaths, both of them very close to each other and very convenient. Sorry?
They're on the same day.
Were they even on the same day?
I think so.
Yeah. Oh, well, there you go then. That's even more so. Very suspicious deaths. And they may well have been that they were poisoned. There's obviously no evidence for that, but it really is an extraordinary coincidence and a very fortunate coincidence for the Protestants, if a coincidence is what it was. And so all of that comes to an end. Now, the work in founding the first English seminary is not lost. What happens is it goes ahead anyway, but it has to be in France. So that's the origin of the seminary for training English priests over the Channel in France. It's at Douai, it then moves to Reims. We get the Douai-Reims Bible from there. Okay, 1558 is when they die. Elizabeth becomes queen, and then there's lots of stuff we could say about Elizabeth after that. I just mentioned two things there. The Acts of Supremacy and Uniformity is similar to the Act of Supremacy here. Basically, Queen Mary undoes all of the Protestant laws. Elizabeth puts them all back in place, sometimes with knobs on, right? Even more Protestant. Act of uniformity, you have to go to the local parish church and hear a Protestant sermon on Sunday, otherwise you're breaking the law. And they take an actual register to see who turns up, and you're breaking the law if you don't even show up, okay? Regnans in Excelsis is the bull of Pope St. Pius V, in which he excommunicates Elizabeth and he absolves her subjects from any obedience to her. Okay, let's go forwards, please. Oh yeah, there we go. That's Shakespeare. That's when he fits into there. So 1564 is when he's born. So it's right at the end of all of this. Okay? That's a brief whistle-stop tour of leading up to Shakespeare. So this is now a timeline that shows some of the events. And again, I picked the ones that I thought might be familiar or might be of interest or are relevant. I can't necessarily say I've got all the right ones here. There may be one or two missing. So he's born in 1564. Right, there's the 39 articles that grew out of Henry VIII's 10 articles. That's 1571. Edmund Campion is martyred in 1581. So Shakespeare would have been, 17 years old, I think, roughly. And in the same year, you get even tighter laws against recusant Catholics. That is, Catholics who refuse to go to the Protestant service in their local church. As Elizabeth's reign goes on, the laws get tighter and tighter, and the punishments get more and more severe. Okay, Throckmorton's plot is in 1583. There's a friend of mine, a gentleman who lives in Suffolk, whose mother, her maiden name was Throckmorton, and she was the last of the family. So it remained a Catholic family down to the 20th century. There are no more of them now. 1585. New laws against priests entering the country and against even being ordained a priest. So if a priest comes from France, the very fact that he now sets foot on English soil means he's committing treason. They don't need him to have done anything. They can arrest him on the spot. And I think, in fact, it even becomes a law against the law to even leave the country so that you can't be made a priest in the first place. Okay, and there's various plots. Babington plot is there, 1586. There are other plots even after Elizabeth dies. The famous one is Titus Oates in the 1600s, which I think even sort of normie non-Catholic historians now admit is basically a false flag operation. A lot of these things often one suspects are the equivalent of, the Twin Towers or whatever the equivalent would be in our day. Guy Fawkes supposedly got all these barrels of gunpowder under Parliament before they caught him red-handed in the act. Again, it's one of those things you can never quite prove it, but you sort of say, well, these people wanted even more oppressive laws against Catholics. This gave them the excuse. Okay, that's a bit convenient. On the other hand, it may have been that certain Catholics got increasingly fed up. It's difficult to say. Okay. 1595 is a great year for the Catholic Church because it gives us the two martyrs. St. Robert Southwell, the Jesuit priest, is martyred in February, and St. Philip Howard in October. St. Robert Southwell is hanged, drawn and quartered at Tyburn, just down the road here, and Philip Howard is a martyr by extinction. He dies in the Tower of London. They don't actually execute him. They just sort of throw him in a cell, and he dies of malnourishment, cold, disease, illness, and so on. Eventually, that's when he dies. Okay, and the King James Bible, so St. Nicholas Owen is martyred after the Gunpowder Plot. We had a talk about him last year, was it? Mm-hmm. It's on the YouTube channel, very interesting, have a look at it. They actually tortured him to death and then lied about it and tried to tell everybody that he took his own life. Disgraceful. And King James Bible, we will look at Psalm 46 later on. Right, let's go. Oh, and 1616 is when he dies, sorry, yeah. Now, this is what I wanted to also emphasise to you. That was a list of events. What I think it's difficult for us to appreciate now is that if you're a Catholic living in that time, there's a constant, I suppose it's what Evelyn Waugh would call a blow upon a bruise, or what I think it might be Solzhenitsyn, describes the kind of psychological thing where they're getting people, breaking down people's resistance, where they say you're going to be released, and they get the prisoner to have a hot shower and put on clean clothes, and then they take him to the gate, and then they say, no, we were never going to release you. Go and put your rags back on again. And it just destroys the poor man's morale, whereas if they'd left him alone, he would have gone on resisting. You sort of see what I mean? What's going on here, if you're a Catholic, is there's constantly just one more bit of hope on the horizon, and then it gets dashed. Okay? So you have Henry VIII making up his own religion. And then you have the people of England rising up against it, but then that's defeated, the Pilgrimage of Grace. And the Catholics lose their monasteries. And then Henry VIII dies. Yes, it's all over, hooray. But no, it's not all over. Well, he's a boy. Maybe he won't do anything. Oh, but these guys are running the kingdom for him, and it's even worse. Okay, and then you have the Western Rising, but that's defeated. And then Edward dies. So Mary, because we've now got a Catholic monarch. Whew, thank God for that. It's all over. And then she dies 5 years later. Okay, then Elizabeth becomes queen in a Catholic ceremony in Westminster Abbey, and swears an oath that she'll be Catholic to the day she dies. And the minute the crown is on her head, she breaks that. She almost certainly had no intention of keeping it. She went through the ceremony in order to become queen, rather. But yeah, so do you see what I mean? It's constant hope on the horizon, and then it's dashed. And you have the Spanish Armada and all of it. Mary Queen of Scots had far more right. She was far more legitimate. She had far more right to be the monarch, the ruler of England, than Queen Elizabeth did. And Queen Elizabeth knew that, and that's ultimately why she had her executed, because she couldn't have somebody who was a potential rival around whom people could rally. We will talk more about her shortly. Next, please. So, I said about the seminary that ended up having to move to France. One of the things that they got the seminarians to do as part of their sort of work, you can't just be praying and you can't just be going to class and lectures and stuff. You have to do some sort of productive work. So one of the things they got them to do, which was a great service to the church, was to translate the Bible into the English of its day. And it's known to us now as the Douay-Rheims Bible, because the seminary was first at Douay and then at Rheims. Okay? I'd like you to notice here, 1582, it predates the King James Bible quite significantly. I mean, obviously it took a while for it to be written. But this is just from the diocese. Between 1577, the date of the martyrdom of St Cuthbert Maine, the college's proto-martyr, he was the first one. Where's he from? Devon, Cornwall, Somerset? It's Cornwall, I think, right? St Cuthbert Maine, he's somewhere down there, isn't he?
I think it's Somerset.
Is it Somerset? Yeah. Okay. And 1680, the execution of Thomas Thwing. Also 1680 is the, Archbishop of Armagh. He was Irish, but they brought him to London to execute him. Oliver Plunkett, thank you. His head is in Armagh Cathedral if you ever go there. But they arrested him and brought him here to execute him at Tyburn. And 1680, the college's last martyr, 158 college members, priests and laymen, secular and religious, met with a martyr's death. Now, that's just priests who were at that seminary. There are other ones who weren't. For instance, there were several Benedictines from various monasteries, Valladolid in Spain and elsewhere. Campion, Southwell, and various others were Jesuits. Okay, these are just the seminary priests. Okay, right, next. So there's, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. That's Tyburn Convent. You can sort of see it's just on the street, just down the road from where there's this little plaque where the gallows stood, and it's a sort of triangular gallows. You can hang 3 people, I think, from each, so you can have 9 people hanging at once. That's the altar in the crypt of Tyburn Convent, which is actually relatively Catholic looking. Unfortunately, the church, the main church upstairs, is absolutely atrocious. But if you ever go there and you phone in advance, the nuns do actually take people down into the crypt and they show you the various relics that they have, which is really worth seeing. Anyway, there we go. So, we need to talk about Tyburn and the martyrs, and it is important for a talk on Shakespeare. If it's not clear why, all will be made clear shortly. I am a Catholic man and a priest. In that faith I have lived, and in that faith do I intend to die. If you esteem my religion treason, then I am guilty. As for other treason, I never committed any. God is my judge. But you have now what you desire. I beseech you to have patience and suffer me to speak a word or two for the discharge of my conscience. In condemning us, you condemn all your own ancestors, our ancient bishops and kings, all that was once the glory of England, the island of saints, and the most devoted child of the See of Peter. Does anybody know whose words these are? This is Edmund Campion, yes. And I love the point he makes at the end. William Cobbett says exactly the same. Campion says the same in his 10 Reasons. You are cutting off the very foundations that you yourselves stand on. Who were those people who signed Magna Carta? Oh yeah, a load of Catholics, okay? Catholic bishops and so on. These law courts that you are trying us in, who founded those law courts? Who gave you the law that happens inside the law courts? Everything is Catholic. 1,000 years almost of Catholic history, you have no legitimacy. Okay, that's the words of Edmund Campion. Right, on we go. Okay, take a look at this now. This isn't Edmund Campion, this is Robert Southwell. Also a Jesuit, also a saint, also a martyr. Now, Robert Southwell is a very good poet in his own right. Another fun fact about him is he is actually related to William Shakespeare. They're cousins. They're not first cousins, they are, I forget, 3rd or 4th or 5th cousins on obviously the mother's side of the family. I think it's fair to say that Shakespeare gets the credit he deserves. I don't think Robert Southwell does. Okay? We may have to sort of skip through this a little bit, which is a shame. I put this in here because when I originally did this, it was a series of lessons, as I say, and we did have the time to look at it. The pounded spice both taste and scent doth please. In fading smoke the force doth incense show. The perished kernel springeth with increase. The lopped tree doth best and soonest grow. So what's he saying? Spice, incense, seed, kernel is a seed, and a tree. All of these things, there's some action that's similar to killing somebody. With spice, what do you use it for? The taste. How do you get the taste out of it? You crush it, okay? What about incense? Well, it's there for the smell, for the smoke. You have to burn it, and in doing so, it dies, but that's how you get the smoke. And the seed, our Lord even says this, doesn't he? Unless it falls into the ground and dies and is buried in the ground, it remaineth itself alone, or something like that. So a seed has to be buried, killed, as it were, and buried in the ground. And a tree, this is true, is called pruning, right? You cut bits off and it grows back better than ever. Okay, if you apply it to a whole forest, it's called coppicing. That bit of the forest grows back better than ever because, of course, it lets in more daylight and so on. So there's this sort of paradox he starts with. Killing is actually, you're kind of giving life by killing, or it's the best thing that can happen. You strengthen somebody by crushing them. Okay, God's spice I was, and pounding was my due. So God was going to crush me. I belong to him, and he has the right to crush me, and that's what I deserved, and that's what should have happened to me, and that is what did happen to me. In fading breath, my incense savoured best. Death was the means, my kernel to renew, by lopping, shot I up to heavenly rest. So somebody is talking in the first person here, not Southwell, the author, because obviously he's alive while he's writing this. So he's talking about somebody else who was martyred. Somebody whose kernel was renewed by death. So became a saint, in other words, went to heaven. And by lopping, shot I up to heavenly rest. Somebody who had, who suffered death by decapitation. Some things more perfect are in their decay, like spark that going out gives clearest light. Such was my hap, whose doleful dying day began my joy, and termed my fortune's spite. Alive a queen, now dead I am a saint. So it's a queen who's talking. Right, I've filled in the word Mary here. In Southwell's poem, it's M blank. But it's almost certainly Mary because, number one, that fits the metre of the verse, and number two, it's almost an anagram of martyr. Once Mary called, my name now martyr is. From earthly reign debarred by restraint, in lieu whereof I reign in heavenly bliss. And it goes, I'm not going to go into it all. It's really, really beautiful poetry. And the whole point is, it's about her martyrdom. It's in the first person, yeah. The bud was opened to let out the rose, the chains unloosed to let the captive go. It's wonderful, yeah. But anyway, okay, let's go forward. So that's a little sample of Robert Southwell. This is another sample of Robert Southwell. Right, TDSD is the day Shakespeare died. I said I'm not an expert at this. I am standing on the shoulders of giants, really, one of whom is a man by the name of Hugh Ross Williamson. Now, Hugh Ross Williamson, I could give a talk all about him. He's a fascinating character. He was one of the very first traditionalists anywhere in the world. He co-founded the Latin Mass Society with Evelyn Waugh, early supporter of the Society of St. Pius X in the early 70s. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, in his day, he was a man of the theatre. He was an actor, okay, but a Shakespearean actor, but also a very accomplished and recognised theatre director. And he brought out various books on Shakespeare, Hugh Ross Williamson did, and they all received national attention in the press and all got glowing reviews, apart from the last one that he wrote, which is this one, The Day Shakespeare Died. He brought it out in 1962. It was panned by the critics, absolutely slated, and it's a great book. But what didn't they like? The whole thesis of the book is Shakespeare was a Catholic, here's the proof. And in 1962, it just still was not socially acceptable to even think that, much less say it out loud. Okay? It's difficult to find. This copy was given to me by his daughter. Some of you might remember an English teacher at a certain school not too far from here, Mr. Ashenden. He is the son-in-law, so it's his wife who's this gentleman's daughter. Okay? He talks about this. I can maybe read a bit from here, but essentially, Robert Southwell, the poet, William Shakespeare, the poet, they're related. They almost certainly knew each other because Shakespeare used to hang around Holborn House in London, where we know Southwell did as well. Right, what's he talking about here? This makes my morning muse resolve in tears, says Southwell. This makes my heavy pen to plain in prose. Christ's thorn is sharp, no head his garland wears. Still finest wits are stilling Venus' rose. In Paynim toys the sweetest veins are spent. To Christian works few have their talents lent. So Southwell is complaining that he can't write poetry, or he almost can't write poetry anymore. His muse has gone into mourning. He's upset, and as a result, he can't compose. His pen is made heavy because of this. Plain means complain. So his heavy pen is complaining in prose. It's hard to write verse. He can't write verse because his pen doesn't want to, because he's so upset. What's he upset about? Christ's thorn is sharp, no head his garland wears. Now, you know this, I'm sure some of you. In the pagan world, you would have the sort of statue of the deity in the temple, and they used to dress them up. For the Panathenaic festival in Athens, for instance, they would have a big procession where they would bring a robe up, and put it on the statue. But one of the things you would do is have a garland. It's like a crown of flowers as a gift. You'd put it on the statue. Still finest wits are stilling Venus's rose. Right, what's Christ's garland? It's made of thorns. It's nasty. It hurts. It's painful. It's very uncomfortable. Nobody's interested. Who wants that? Who wants pain? Who wants suffering? Who wants a crown of thorns? Nobody's interested. They're all on about Venus and various pagan deities because that's nice. There's nothing inconvenient about them. The sweetest veins. He's talking about the arts, presumably literature, poetry, but also music, painting, sculpture, I don't know. The arts generally are being wasted on pagan toys. Pagan themes are not even just silly stuff. And nobody is putting his talents to talking about Christ and converting people to Christ. Now, this is interesting, and it was also very true. It's something I find very irritating. One of my favourite composers, for instance, is John Philip Rameau. Another one that I like very, and he's in the early 1700s. I also am quite partial to the music of Henry Purcell, who's in the late 1600s. What do they both have in common that I find irritating is where they just go into this sort of pagan gods and goddesses and so on and so forth. And you just think, I understand why. It was very fashionable at the time. The Renaissance was very much a double-edged sword. And a lot of learning from the kind of classical antiquity was discovered that way, which was very useful. But not everything in classical antiquity is good. The freedom of the children of God is we can take what's good and leave what's bad. But it's like all fads and fashions. There's a period of at least a couple of hundred years where all things classical antiquity are the rage, and you get people composing music and poems about Venus and Apollo and Jupiter and so on. Okay? Southwell doesn't like it. Who is this aimed at? Well, we don't know that it's aimed at Shakespeare. It could be aimed at artists in his age generally, but it's certainly true, I think it's fair to say, Shakespeare, if he had read that, and I think more than likely would have done, he probably saw himself in that a little bit as well. It is also true that Shakespeare doesn't set all of his plays in pagan antiquity. Now, I'm not able to fit an exact pattern for you and tell you exactly when, but Shakespeare does, at a given point, seem to start setting his plays in contemporary Italy very often, which allows him to put a Catholic priest in as the main character, but get away with it because he can say, oh, well, it's in Italy, that's how they do it there. Okay, think about, for instance, Romeo and Juliet, the character of Friar Lawrence. Okay, but there are plenty of other examples as well. Okay, let's have a look forwards because there's another thing here. Right, this, I think, is something where we can link Southwell to Shakespeare. And when he's talking to him about how to approach the arts. To my worthy good cousin, Master W.S., reads this dedication title page. This is Southwell. Southwell, shortly before he was martyred in 1595, he got a lot of his poems and had them sort of published in volume form. So this is the sort of dedication. If rather than read the typeface here, if we go forwards one, this is what he says. Worthy cousin, poets, by abusing their talent and making the follies and feignings of love the customary subject of their base endeavours, have so discredited this faculty that a poet, a lover, and a liar are by many reckoned but three words of one signification. So poets in our own day have just discredited themselves. But the vanity of men cannot counterpoise the authority of God, who, delivering many parts of Scripture in verse, think of the Psalms, for instance, and by his apostle, willing us to exercise our devotion in hymns and spiritual sonnets, warranteth the art to be good and the use allowable. Scripture shows us that verse is not a bad thing in and of itself, even though it's being misused in our own time. And because the best course to let them see the error of their works is to weave a new web in their own loom, I here laid a few coarse threads together to invite some skilfuller wits to go forward in the same, or to begin some finer piece wherein it may be seen how well verse and virtue suit together. So Southwell is saying, here's some poetry, we need to reconquer it. This is true, all of the arts in Shakespeare's day, in Southwell's day, were sort of captured by the Protestants, and Southwell is saying, no, look, it's not the medium that's wrong, even Scripture uses it, we need to recapture it and make it Catholic. What an interesting manifesto, to be aimed at a cousin, Master W.S. Who could that be, I wonder? How many cousins did Southwell have whose initials are W.S.? Right. Maybe in the question and answer at the end we can have a bit of a discussion about this. Shakespeare, part of the problem is he's not a brave man and he is playing a sort of double game. He's treading a very fine line. He goes on to be, his acting troupe go on to be the Lord Chamberlain's men under Queen Elizabeth and the King's men under James I. So he can't openly be too Catholic. However, there are more than a few, it's too many to be a coincidence. There are more than a few instances where I think his Catholicity really shows through and where I think you can say he clearly, this was addressed to him, he took it to heart. And he has tried to use the art form as a means of conveying the message. Let's go on. Okay, right, this is a reminder for me. What do I need to remember? Right, let's talk about the man himself then before we look at actual examples of Shakespeare. His grandparents and his parents. Okay, Shakespeare is from the Midlands, Warwickshire. His grandparents, so there was a well-known family at the time, well-known for being recusant, for being Catholic, for having no time at all for the Protestant Reformation. It's called the Arden family. They're not exactly nobility, they're maybe sort of minor nobility. They're landowners and they're very wealthy. Okay? And that was one of his grandparents. Now, there's a very unusual marriage takes place where the daughter of the landowners, the daughter from the family that live in the big house, as it were, marries the son of one of the labourers on the land who works for the family, okay, whose name was John Shakespeare. It's a marriage, obviously, that cuts right across the class divide. Not unheard of, such things do happen, but unusual then, even more so than today. Why might that have happened? Why might that have been allowable? And why might the family have allowed John Shakespeare to marry their daughter? I think the most plausible answer, for me at least, is because he was a devout Catholic. And if you're going to have a marriage like that, where there's a sort of mismatch of class or whatever, you do need at least something in common that's strong enough and important enough to both of the couple that it will account for that, I think. Okay, so Shakespeare's father was John Shakespeare, and he marries, was her name Mary Arden? I think it was. Okay, and then they moved to Stratford. Stratford-on-Avon, not Stratford in East London. And he sets up as a small business owner. He's a glover. He makes gloves. And he does very well out of it. He makes a nice living. He makes a decent amount of money. He gets involved, as it were, in local politics, as we would say today. He becomes an alderman of Stratford. And then at a given point, and I should have written down the year, it's in the late 70s. It's sort of 1577, 78, round about then, 79 maybe. There's a sudden reversal of his fortune, and we don't know exactly why. But suddenly the family is ruined, they've lost all their money, I think he's lost his business. He mortgaged one of his wife's properties, so they've fallen on hard times financially. He's, exactly the same time, the register shows he's not turning up to the council meetings anymore, and then he loses his position there. Why? Well, coincidentally or not, right around that time, there was a government crackdown on recusant Catholics in that part of the world, okay, in the Midlands. Could it be that the two are somehow related? The Protestantism, England is officially Protestant, but how thoroughly the laws are enforced decreases the further you get from London. Basically, the big cities are the Protestant strongholds. The more you kind of go out into the country, the weaker a grasp it has, the government has in London. So some parts of the world, like North Wales and Lancashire, people were able to kind of almost openly practice as Catholics for quite a while. Warwickshire is not, that whole part of the world is not as far away from London, but it's far enough away. They had a big crackdown on recusant Catholics at the time. John Shakespeare falls on hard times. Okay. We know, by the way, that John Shakespeare was a recusant Catholic. I said before that it was the law that you had to attend the local parish church with a Protestant service. If you didn't go, in these early days of Elizabeth's reign, you were simply fined. But they did record the name of those who were fined, a bit like having a criminal record. We have a record of who was fined for refusal to attend. Recusant means a refuser. That's what it means. Recusare in Latin is the verb to refuse. So the people who refused to go, we have a list of them. John Shakespeare's name is on that list. There's no doubt at all he was a recusant Catholic. Okay? Also, we know that John Shakespeare left a spiritual will and testament because it was found in the 1700s. It was then lost again, rather annoyingly. We know it existed. Enough people saw it when it was there. It was an idea that Edmund Campion brought with him. The idea being you have a last will and testament that disposes of your temporal goods. Your spiritual will and testament is for your family and close relatives so that you can leave them some proof that you were Catholic. And I believe in purgatory and transubstantiation and so on and so forth, okay? But not saying it openly in a way that will get your grandchildren into trouble, if that sort of makes sense. Edmund Campion brought this spiritual will with him, and wherever he went round the country, a lot of the Catholics there said, well, that's a great idea, I want one of those, and they physically copied it by hand, inserting their own name into it. Campion visited Stratford right around that time. Campion was there. He stayed at the neighbours of the Shakespeares. Almost certainly the Shakespeares would have gone to Father Edmund Campion's Mass, which would have been in secret in this house. So there's no doubt at all that John Shakespeare, his father, was a Catholic, and not just nominally, enough to go getting into real trouble with the law over it. By the way, Shakespeare's eldest daughter, Susanna, also is on the list of recusants who refused and were fined and got in trouble. So Shakespeare's father on the government list, officially a recusant. Shakespeare's daughter, officially a recusant Catholic. Is it really possible that it skipped a generation, or could this man be, as it were, the missing link between the two? Well, there's a missing period in his own life that we don't know a great deal about. He went to the local grammar school. He left at the age of 14, which was normal at the time. And, one other thing from that, before I move on from there, from that period of time, I said there was a government crackdown. Coventry was the last place, I think, that they performed these sort of mystery plays from the Middle Ages, I think on the Feast of Corpus Christi. And Shakespeare would have been probably 14, 15, something like that. He would have been a boy, maybe a bit younger than that. But again, we can't prove it, but it seems likely that John Shakespeare took his son to see one of these last Corpus Christi, cycle of Corpus Christi plays before they were completely banned by law, and that may well have been what got him into the theatre and acting. Right, he goes anyway. So he goes to London. He ends up working in the theatre and very successfully. We don't know a lot about those hidden years. When he went to London, obviously he's not from London. Who's he going to stay with? Who does he know? All the families that he stays with initially when he's starting out, what do they all have in common? They're all Catholic families. Again, is that a coincidence? I mentioned his daughter Susanna. She's also tied up in all sorts of, priests and things. She's definitely a recusant. When Shakespeare finally retires, so he died in 1616. When did he retire? 16, I want to say 11, 12, something like that. He died not long after. He had been already buying property in Stratford, ready to retire. He had a wife and 3 children. Susanna was the oldest, and Judith and Hamnet, twins. His wife, by the way, was 8 years older than him, and Susanna was born 6 months after they got married. So it was one of those marriages. He'd already been buying property ready to retire back to in Stratford. In fact, the house that he bought had belonged to a well-known recusant Catholic family who essentially had been fined into penury. Their entire fortune had been destroyed in fines, and this once rather fine house was falling down. Shakespeare bought it and started doing it up again. But then the last thing he does is he buys a house in London. There's no doubt at all about it. We have an example of his signature on the mortgage document. It's a house in Blackfriars. I think it backed onto the river. He never lived there. He never stayed there once. He literally bought the house and left London and never saw this house again that he'd bought. Leased it to some friends who let other people stay there and so on. What on earth is going on? Well, it was pulled down in the 1700s and they discovered priest hiding holes in it. They discovered it had been a mass house. So for me, that's an absolute clincher. No question at all about that, what's going on there. And then he retires and goes back and lives in Stratford. He dies only a few years later. The last words that he wrote, some of you will have seen this already in the poster advertising this talk. It's the end of the Tempest, and it's the character saying this is the end, but it's also the actor coming out on stage and saying, that's our play, hope you be forgiving towards us, I hope you liked it. But it's also Shakespeare saying to his theatre-going audience, that's my career over, I hope you enjoyed it. And the last words are these, and my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. Cures all faults, sorry. As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free. Now, as with all things with Shakespeare, there's a certain ambiguity there. Indulgence means just, oh, indulge me. If you thought the play was a bit rubbish, just clap anyway, right? But indulgence has a very specific meaning, which Protestants don't like at all. It's very much a Catholic thing there. Also, as you from crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free. The idea is freeing somebody from punishment. You're praying for the dead in purgatory. Okay, so he's actually saying, if you enjoyed my, pray for me. Okay, those are the last words he ever wrote. I cannot imagine a Protestant writing words like those. That's the man in his own words. Anyway, so there we go. Right, Clare Asquith. I mentioned Hugh Ross Williamson the day Shakespeare died. This is Clare Asquith here. Sorry, the other, Joseph Pearce is pretty good. That's one of his books, Through Shakespeare's Eyes. I'd recommend all of these, by the way. People are a bit sniffy about Joe Pearce because they say, oh, he took other people's ideas and repackaged it. Good for him, say I, if it brings this to a wider audience. I mean, that's all I'm doing with this talk, really, to be honest. Clare Asquith, very interesting. She was, I think she's a descendant of the First World War, Asquith, the Prime Minister. But she was in the Soviet Union because her husband was some sort of diplomat. And in the, I think, 70s or 80s, something like that. And in the Soviet Union, they would go, and some of you will know this, life was pretty grim for almost everybody. But if you were part of the ruling elite, you did sort of still have some of the comforts that would go on in the West. Because it's, of course, an egalitarian society, it's totally hypocritical. Anyway, so they would go to the theatre, and these plays would be performed in Russian, and it would be Russian classics. It would be Chekhov or whatever, from before the Bolshevik Revolution, from the Tsarist era. And so the people there would be, you know, the great and the good, party bigwigs and so on, but also, you know, fairly intelligent people, academics and so on, and foreign diplomats and all of that kind of thing. And she said after a while, she realised that there was a deliberate double entendre going on by the actors. And for those in the know, that I suppose we would call it a dog whistle today. So they'd be talking about the Tsar. Yeah, the Tsar, right? They obviously can't say, you know, Brezhnev or whoever it is, or communism or whatever. And because it's the theatre in the Soviet Union, you had the secret police stood in the back, the NKVD, you know, ready to take down anyone's name. But it went right over their head. They weren't in on the joke. But the people who were in on the joke. And then she came back here, she said, well, is it just possible that something similar is going on with Shakespeare? Because in some ways there are some similarities. You can't openly say, you know, up with the Pope, down with Queen Elizabeth, but you can say nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And she says yes, and she gives various examples of this. Okay, I'm just going to take you through. How are we doing for time? Great Scott. What number slide is this?
18.
18 out of
43.
Right, very quickly. There was an earthquake in London in 1580, which was when Campion landed, and it wasn't a small earthquake. The church bells were rung by this earthquake. Bits of stone masonry fell off, and 2 people were killed by it. This is from Simpson's Life of Campion. Go on. Okay, this is Romeo and Juliet, where you have the character of the nurse that, nobody knows quite what to make of her. She just chatters away in the background and is annoying and doesn't add anything at all to the plot. And she's just a garrulous old woman. It's kind of funny, but not uproariously funny. And Asquith says, if you look at what she actually says, it's full of these little coded references. Okay, she's talking about Juliet's 14, and I remember 11 years ago there was an earthquake. Huh, that's interesting. She talks about this earthquake. Next, the Dove House wall. Sorry, the very bottom line. I remember I was sitting under the sun under the Dove House wall. Next, and then, so next, it's all blah, 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 blah. Look at this. Lady Capulet says, enough of this, I pray thee hold thy peace. Yeah, that's fine, be quiet now. Yes, madam. And then she carries on. Anyway, but as I was saying, I cannot yet choose but laugh. Okay, she keeps repeating Juliet, Juliet. Juliet's name means July, and July. I think it was it July that Campion, was it when he was captured? Anyway, he was captured hiding in a dove house, and I think it was in July. She says Lammas Eve at one point. Lammas is the 1st of August, so 31st of July. So Asquith, her point is, it's constant sort of dog whistle references to Campion and his capture. On we go. Sorry, I need to hurry up if we're going to get through all of this. This is somebody's PhD thesis that says the same thing. On we go. Okay, on we go, same thing. Okay, right. Can I indulge you a little bit and just read from Hugh Ross Williamson, The Day Shakespeare Died? This is his description of the death of Mary, Queen of Scots. It's wonderful. You're very patient. If I'm taxing you too much, please just boo and throw things. No, I can't. We haven't got time. There's a wonderful description in here of how she dies. She's saying her prayers. She knows they're going to execute her. And this absolutely atrocious, smug, really unlikable Protestant clergyman comes up and starts telling her, oh no, you're right, you need to... the same thing that Protestants say today. Forget about the Pope, the Rosary, the Blessed Virgin Mary, just Jesus. You need the Bible and Jesus, that's all you need, right? And it's the Dean of Peterborough. He's a really not very likeable man. And she's, I wish I could read that to you. She's such a saint. She certainly has to be canonized one day. And she just is saying her prayers in Latin and saying the Rosary. Now, the Dean of Peterborough went on to be made Bishop of London, and he built himself a palace in Fulham. If you know Fulham, that's why Fulham Palace Road is called Fulham Palace Road. He built it. His name was Fletcher. Okay, RF in the stained glass, it says in Fulham Palace. Richard Fletcher. He's better known as being the father of a certain John Fletcher. John Fletcher was 17 when his father, the bishop, died. He went into the theatre and became an actor, and he was one of Shakespeare's troupe. That's him there. Yeah. He's also the author of the play Henry VIII. Sometimes this is not included in the canon of Shakespeare, and sometimes it is. If you ever hear about Shakespeare's Henry VIII, just beware. Bits of it are by Shakespeare. Large bits of it are not by Shakespeare. Okay? The great Shakespeare critic, Dr. Samuel Johnson, edited Shakespeare. The man who wrote the first ever English dictionary says that in his opinion, you can tell which bits are written by Shakespeare because the virtue enters whenever Catherine of Aragon enters the play and leaves whenever she leaves. Okay, his word is good enough for me. And Hugh Ross Williamson, who also, his word is also good enough for me. I don't know enough about these things. But Henry VIII, the play ends with this wonderful paean of praise for Thomas Cranmer, which I just cannot imagine Shakespeare ever writing. But the bits with Catherine of Aragon, if we go forwards one, right, now hold on, stop. Yeah, just put the text but not anything else. There we go, right, because I want you to see if you can work out. This is not Catherine of Aragon speaking. This is from the play Henry VIII, and this is one of the bits written by Shakespeare, not Fletcher. He was a scholar and a ripe good one. Who are they talking about? Exceeding wise, fair-spoken and persuading, lofty and sour to them that loved him not, but to those men that sought him, sweet as summer. And though he were unsatisfied in getting which was a sin, yet in bestowing, madam, he was most princely. Ever witness for him those twins of learning that he raised in you, Ipswich and Oxford, one of which fell with him, unwilling to outlive the good that did it. The other, though unfinished, yet so famous, so excellent in art, and still so rising, that Christendom shall ever speak his virtue, his overthrow heaped happiness upon him, for then, and not till then, he felt himself, and found the blessedness of being little, and, to add greater honours to his age, that man could give him, he died, fearing God. Who is being spoken about? Very good, Thomas Wolsey. Thomas Wolsey, who was ambitious, proud, worldly, powerful, wealthy, and the best thing that could happen to him is he lost it all right before he died, and he died fearing God. This is, if you just put the remainder of the slide up, there we go. It's Griffith, the servant, telling Catherine of Aragon the news about Wolsey's death. I think there's a picture of him there. Yeah, that's Thomas Wolsey. Okay. Now, bearing that in mind, and that's description, which if we go on the hypothesis that that is a bit written by Shakespeare, and I think it is, I'm going to show you a description of Wolsey's death written by somebody else, and I wonder if you can spot any similarities. Next. So this is exceeding wise, fair-spoken, high-minded, full of revenge, vicious of his body, lofty to his enemies, were they never so big, to those who accepted and sought his friendship, wonderful, courteous, a ripe schoolman. I think it said a ripe, good scholar in the previous. Can you see the similarity? It's almost like it was written by... Clearly, now this precedes it, so Shakespeare's one. Shakespeare has read this. Yeah, Wolsey ended so perfectly that at the hour of his death it did him more honour than all the pomp of his life past. Okay, this is Edmund Campion, and it's from Campion's History of Ireland. Cited in Holinshed's Chronicles, which is a source that Shakespeare had for a lot of his history, for the history plays. Holinshed himself uses a chronicle by, let me get this right, Edward Hall, and who's virulently Protestant. Almost all the first editions were destroyed during Mary Tudor's reign. One of them turned up, and in 1940 an antiquarian bookseller in London found a copy with 16th century annotations in the margin, hundreds of them, and became convinced that it was actually Shakespeare's copy. I think there's a good chance that it is. It's a man called Alan Keane, and he published a book about it. It's called The Annotator. I ordered it, it hasn't arrived yet. But I think that's a tantalising, that's a fascinating, imagine that's Shakespeare's actual, hundreds of annotations in the margin. There's one bit where the chronicler is railing against the proud priors in their abbeys, and the person annotating it just says, always lying. He's got no sympathy at all for this. Yeah, there we go. But isn't it interesting? Shakespeare, I think, very clearly has read Campion. They almost certainly met. They probably went to his mass when he was a boy. The chances are he may have bumped into him in London, somewhere like Holborn House. As I say, he knew Southwell, they knew each other, they were related. Okay, let's go on. Okay. I mean, you might want to ask me about this. We're not going to have time to go through it. Falstaff, there's a proof of Shakespeare's Catholicity there. The dark versus fair thing, that's an Asquith thesis. It's a bit like High Church and Low Church with the Anglicans. There's a bit in A Midsummer Night's Dream where the two women are fighting and they're trading insults, and Hermia says to Helena, "Thou painted maypole." And so it's the sort of short and dark are code for Protestant, and tall and fair or colourful or painted are code for Catholic. But anyway, Merchant of Venice is fascinating because of the whole Jew thing. There's no question at all, Shylock is very much a Jew. There's no getting around it. And so how does a modern guy deal with that play? One of two ways. Either we can't possibly perform that because it's anti-Semitic, that's one way. The other way is to completely twist it. David Allen White used to say this. Oh, sorry, I should mention him as well. He's another one who's worth listening to. He died about a year ago, God rest his soul. Do say a prayer for him. He was actually a practicing Catholic. A lot of his talks are still out there on MP3. He says the other thing that they do with the Merchant of Venice is they twist the thing completely so that Shylock is actually the hero. And it's a tragedy about poor old Shylock, which obviously is complete nonsense. It completely violates the play as Shakespeare wrote it. But anyway, Hamlet, there's loads of stuff in Hamlet. The whole thing about the ghost, did poor Ophelia commit suicide or not, and they won't allow her a proper burial? That was not a Protestant thing. That was only a Catholic thing. The Church of England didn't bring in rules forbidding the burial of suicides until much later on. Okay? And in Shakespeare's own day, this is in about 1601, he went back to Stratford briefly. His own father died. And also what happened in Stratford is there was was it a boy or a girl? I think it might have been a boy. In fact, I think his name may even have been Hamlet. It was a bit of a cause célèbre because the inquest went on for about 8 weeks. He fell in and drowned. There was a tree that was hanging over and it caused a bit of a pool of water and they couldn't work out was it suicide or not and so on. I mean, for a Protestant, that's a completely immaterial question in those days. Only a Catholic would have even understood the point of that. But Ophelia, those of you who know Hamlet, she gets maimed rights. They won't give her the proper rights because it might have been a suicide. Okay, priests and parsons, biblical language we will look at. Let's go next, please. I'm racing through this. Vittorio hasn't told me to stop yet, so yeah, I'm pushing my luck.
This point's like the last. You can end on this point.
Okay, what number slide are we on?
We're on 28. So you're past halfway.
Since you've just accidentally highlighted it, this is Psalm 46. The King James Bible came out in 1611. Shakespeare would have been 47 years old. So he would have been working on it when he was 46 years old. We know he worked on the Psalms. Lots of people worked on the King James Bible. Okay, it's a Protestant Bible. But if the king orders you to, and he's one of the king's men, he's going to work on it. Psalm 46, if you ignore the sort of introduction and you count 46 words in, you get the word shake. 46 words that you have to ignore the salah. 46 words in from the end is the word spear. It's like he's buried his signature in there. And I think I included the Dowie Reams version of this psalm just to compare. I think it doesn't even say spear, it says weapons or something. And I don't think even it says shake in the other version. So that's his little signature buried in there. If we go forwards one. Yeah, the mountains were troubled. There's no shake there. And yeah, break the weapons. There we go. So there's no spear. That's the Dowie Reams, which remember predated the King James. Oh. Well, presumably the original one, although actually the English is modern. The English is the modern spelling. You're quite right. Yes.
Well, most people use the Challoner, and you get that chap. What was it? Dowie Reams only. You know, the chap who rails against the Challoner version, and he's typed out the original, modernising the spelling.
Okay.
And
I don't know. drbo.org is where I got it from.
Probably the Challoner.
Probably is. Right. Shall we?
Yeah, this would be a good point.
We'll pause there. Okay. All right. And then let me just read you a little bit from The Day Shakespeare Died, Hugh Ross Williamson. Robert Southwell, born in Norfolk in 1561, and thus 3 years older than Shakespeare, had been brought up a Catholic, sent abroad, and educated at Dowie. And then he comes back as a Jesuit. It was an apostolate. Dowie, by the way, had a school for boys as well as I suppose it was what would later become known as a minor seminary. Anyway, then he goes and becomes a Jesuit priest. It was an apostolate which in many ways recalled that of Blessed Edmund Campion, his forerunner in martyrdom. He was also a poet, one of the most popular of the day, who put his genius at the service of his religion and used the idiom of the time, even euphemism, to teach truths of the faith. There were 10 editions of his poems in his short lifetime, and all were, in all probability, due to the patronage of Southampton. He's a distant cousin. I forgot to mention this chap before, and it's really unforgivable. Henry, I'm not sure anybody knows how you pronounce his name, Wriothesley. It's written W-R Wriothesley. Henry Wriothesley, I think that's how it's pronounced. Earl of Southampton, I think is distant. All three of them are distant related. He's great friends with Shakespeare. I think there's even a suggestion that some of the love poetry was written to him. Okay? It's not a romantic love, it's a passionate friendship. But the Earl of Southampton, he's the one that owns Holborn House in London, where Shakespeare hung out. Robert Southwell also was known to hang out there, and also, I think, Philip Howard, who you remember died in the same year as Southwell. Okay, in 1592, this is Hugh Ross Williamson speaking. In 1592, Southwell was betrayed and captured and atrociously tortured 13 times to try and make him reveal the names and whereabouts of secret Catholics. His steadfastness impressed even Robert Cecil, who admitted to a friend, quote, "They boast about the heroes of antiquity, but we have a new torture, which it is not possible for a man to bear. And yet I have seen Robert Southwell hanging by it, still as a tree trunk, and no one able to drag one word from his mouth." So he won't give anybody away. One of his poems is called Mary Magdalene's Funeral Tears, and Hugh Ross Williamson quotes this little bit, 1591, quote, "In fables are often figured mortal truths." Sorry, wrong. "In fables are often figured moral truths, that covertly uttered to a common good, which, without mask, would not find so free a passage." Unquote. That's Southwell. Now, I don't think I could come up with a better description for what Shakespeare is doing. If he openly says, you know, the Catholic Church is right, Protestantism is wrong, and so on, not only is he going to lose everything, but arguably people won't listen. So he does say that, but he kind of slips it in there under the guise of being a, you know, a history play about England, or a light-hearted comedy that happens to be set in Italy, or a fantasy set on a mythical island somewhere, or whatever it might be. But there are Catholic things right the way through. Hugh Ross Williamson quotes the Countess de Chambrun, who says that there's no doubt at all Shakespeare, of all the writers, he's concerned with death, and he points out there's a catechism at the time which has a whole section instructing Catholics how to make a good death. And whenever a character in Shakespeare is facing the possibility of death, suddenly that character becomes concerned with, am I right with God? Repentance, but also confession, absolution, the last rites, and so on. The Hamlet, the ghost, for instance, the ghost tells Hamlet that I died, unannealed, unshriven, unanointed, and with all my sins on my head. In other words, I was murdered, but at the moment that they murdered me, I wasn't able to go to communion. I wasn't able to go to confession. Unshriven means not having had absolution. Unanointed, that I couldn't get the last rites, and so on. That's his. But the ghost, by the way, I think is not really his father. That's pretty clear. It's actually the devil. It is the devil, and there's a number of ways you can prove that just from what the ghost himself says. It's not really his father. It's evil and it's real, rather like the witches in Macbeth. They are there, they really are evil, they're demonic, and they really exist. Okay, right. Shakespeare worked on the King James Bible. He wasn't the only one. There were about 50 odd. If you think about it, if you're the king and you're literally putting your name on this Bible, you want the very best. So lots of people worked on it, including Shakespeare. There's the Dowie Reams. Don't go any further. Right. The interesting question is this. Biblical language pops up all the time, even in everyday speech, even today just about. And it's you would expect it to pop up in the plays of Shakespeare. Shakespeare is known for using an extraordinary number of words, some of which he just made up. But there's even an art to making up a plausible sounding word. I think he uses something like 22,000 words, different words. Nobody else even comes close. When he uses biblical language, which Bible is it very clearly from? Well, Hugh Ross Williamson says, and bear in mind he's writing this at the start of the 1960s, so just about on the eve of Vatican II. He says, when you meet somebody, you can tell whether they're an Anglican, a Protestant, or a Catholic if they use a certain turn of speech where a Protestant says it this way and a Catholic says it that way. And he says, wheat and cockle, for instance. And he says, I've always tried this and it always works. I should read you the bit in there, but it's in there somewhere. He says, I've even known it work with someone who was an Anglican all his life and recently converted and is still using the Protestant version of it. Okay? So this is Matthew chapter 13. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's coming up soon, isn't it? It's in about February. Is it Septuagesima, Sexagesima? It's the gospel, round about then. And he says, an enemy hath done this. You will know the one, I'm sure. Okay? But notice here in the King James, it's... did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? So the weeds are called tares. Okay? In the Dowie Reams, Sir, didst thou not sow good seed in thy field? Whence then hath it cockle? So a Catholic talks about separating the wheat from the cockle. Okay? This is Coriolanus by Shakespeare. And the politicians are saying, the people are demanding corn, we're starving, give us food. And the one politician is saying, well, look, just don't suck up to the common people because they'll just keep asking for more and it's going to be our destruction. Now, as I live, I will. My nobler friends, I crave their pardons. For the mutable rank-scented... I love the language, by the way, the rank-scented many. They're smelly. Anyway, sorry. For the mutable rank-scented many, let them regard me as I do not flatter, and therein behold themselves. I say again, in soothing them, the rank-scented many, we nourish against our Senate the cockle of rebellion, not the tares of rebellion. Okay? Rebellion, insolence, sedition, for which we ourselves have ploughed and sowed and scattered. So the speaker in Coriolanus is using a growing, farming metaphor there. It's the seeds of our own destruction, we've ploughed the field and so on. But notice he says, the cockle of our own rebellion, which is the Dowie Reams. I think I highlighted it on the next thing. Is that right? There we go. Yeah, look at that. So Shakespeare, who worked on the King James Bible, he's using a biblical metaphor and he's using consciously biblical language. And which one does he choose? He chooses the Dowie Reams translation to use. Okay. Next, I don't think I have any more where the slides are ready, but there were some others I sort of had ready to talk about, the prodigal son and a few other bits. Yeah, okay, let's go on. Right, pause. Let's not go too far ahead. Right. Shakespeare's King John. One or two commentators, excuse me, over the years have used Shakespeare's play King John as sort of proof that he was really a Protestant. It's that King John. It's the one we all know, and he's sort of in the play. He's rebellious against Rome, etc., etc. Okay, so this proves Shakespeare was a Protestant. Excuse me. Now it's interesting. King John does give speeches against the Pope and so forth, one or two in the Shakespeare, but it's in the mouth of a man who Shakespeare does not depict as a very likeable character. People are always quoting Shakespeare, but not the character in Shakespeare. My favourite is, you see this on sort of little key rings in gift shops and stuff. To thine own self be true. Shakespeare. No, that's Polonius that says that. Polonius is not read Hamlet. He's not a man that you would take advice from at all, right? So you get these speeches about, against the Pope, but it's in the mouth of King John, who's really not a very likable or trustworthy character. Furthermore, Shakespeare's King John was, a lot of his stories, he sort of gets them from other people, or he reworks earlier plays. This is a reworking of an earlier play called The Troublesome Reign of King John. I'm not sure if we know who it's by. But The Troublesome Reign of King John is a play where it's very anti-Catholic. It's very much Protestant. So, for instance, I've got one or two examples of a speech or an event in the original play and how Shakespeare has it. So on the left, I'll seize the abbey lubber's lands. Abbey lubber is an insult against monks. Into my hands to pay my men of war. King John needs to pay his soldiers. I haven't got the money. I'll just steal it from the monasteries. The Pope and popelings shall not grease themselves with golden groats that are the soldiers' due. All of that propaganda about these monks rolling around in everybody's money while the poor people are starving and so on is a classic Protestant trope. Right, what does Shakespeare, that entire speech there, he reduces to, our abbeys and our priories shall pay this expedition's charge. Notice what's missing. All the language about the popelings and the abbey lubbers and the groats and all of that kind of thing, okay? Here's another speech. Again, this is King John talking. The arch-proud titled priest of Italy that calls himself Grand Vicar of God, and then he refers to the fact that the Pope has called him an ass and says, the title reverently might I infer became the king's that erst have borne the load, the slavish weight of that controlling priest. So in other words, it's not me that's the ass, it's all my predecessors who put up with this Pope. Right, Shakespeare completely cuts it out. It's just gone. He completely cuts that bit out. Okay. Now, at the end of the play, what happens? In this play, King John is killed. He's murdered. And he's murdered, furthermore, by the evil, wicked, scheming abbot of a monastery, who I forget how he kills him. He poisons him or some sort of dishonest thing. And one of his sort of self-righteous knights sees the king's body dead there. This is the fruit of popery, when true kings are slain and shouldered out by monks and friars. Boo! Okay. And then he kills the abbot in revenge for having murdered the king. There lie the abbot, abbey lubber, devil, march with the monk unto the gates of hell, he says. Okay, how does Shakespeare have that? Oh, it's gone completely. That whole scene cut out. And in fact, in Shakespeare's play, King John doesn't die. He doesn't die. Next, in fact, not only that, he reconciles himself to Rome and it all ends happily. So very interesting. It's a different play in many ways. And the last words of the whole play, in the troublesome reign of King John, let England live but true within itself, and all the world can never wrong the state. If England's peers and people join in one, nor Pope, nor France, nor Spain can do them wrong. Can you see the same sort of old Protestant tropes in there? This is Shakespeare's closing lines. Come the three corners of the world in arms, and we shall shock them, naught shall make us rue, if England to itself do rest but true. Means the same thing, but notice what's missing. The Pope, France, Spain, all these kind of Protestant boogeymen, oh, the Spanish are coming to get you. They're gone. Okay? All right. Is that it? Oh, no, one bit. Yeah, so King John separates himself from Rome, never reconciles. He gets murdered by a scheming abbot, and he dies cursing popery. In Shakespeare's version, Shakespeare's King John, he initially breaks with Rome, he's excommunicated, and then he thinks better of it and dies reconciled with the Pope. Okay? Right, these were a few more things. What number slide are we on now?
36 out of 43.
Okay. Yeah, oh, this is the same as before, isn't it? Maybe some of you, we can talk a bit more about this. Well, I'll just mention it because I've not said anything about him. Falstaff, my favourite character. Okay, my role model. I want to be like him when I grow up. Everybody loves Falstaff. If you don't know Falstaff, you need to get to know him. He's hilarious. He's just the worst guy ever. He's a drunkard and a glutton and a liar and a cheat and a total coward, and everybody loves him. He's comedy gold, and just the most disgraceful guy ever. It's in Henry IV Part 1 and Henry IV Part 2. There is a story that Shakespeare, the character of Falstaff was so popular that Queen Elizabeth commanded him to write a play about Falstaff in love, and he wrote The Merry Wives of Windsor, which I don't know. I know Henry IV Parts 1 and 2 very well. David Allen White came and gave it, for those of you who remember him, gave a talk here in London at St Joseph and Padarn's Church in 2009, which I was at, which was very, very good. What's interesting is that Falstaff wasn't the original name of the character. The original character was called Sir John Oldcastle. And the family, the Oldcastles, protested vigorously, and Shakespeare was made to change the name. And Oldcastle, for those of you who don't know, was a very famous follower of Wycliffe. He was a Lollard from about 100 years before Shakespeare, whom the Protestants claim as their kind of proto-predecessors. I don't think that's really true. Wycliffe taught all sorts of weird and wonderful doctrines. But anyway, the Protestants say that they are the same as Wycliffe's followers. Oldcastle, there's one or two clues in the play. There's a bit at the start of Henry IV Part 1. Falstaff comes in and Prince Hal says, "Hello, how are you?" But he makes a pun on his name. He says, "How is my old Sir John of the Castle?" It doesn't work because he's called Falstaff. And the first time you hear that, you could, what does that mean? There's another bit where there's a line, it's where they rob the pilgrims on their way to Canterbury. There are a load of pilgrims on their way to Canterbury, and they're going to be highwaymen, let's jump on them and rob them at knife point. That's what Falstaff and his friends are going to do. You can see what kind of a moral character he is, right? And Prince Hal plays a trick on him. He robs him. He waits till they've robbed the pilgrims, and then he robs him. And Falstaff, of course, lies about the whole thing, and etc. when they get home. But as he's running away, because he's a total coward, he's shouting and begging for his life and running away as fast as he can, which is not very fast because he's also very fat. There's a line in iambic pentameter: Falstaff sweats to death and lards the lean earth as he walks along. It's something like that. I should have written it down. It doesn't scan, but Oldcastle sweats to death does scan. There's a few little clues about that, and it's, I think, beyond any real dispute. Anyway, I could say more, but let's go on. Right. Here we go. Okay. Actually, we're a bit further on than I thought. What number slide is this?
38.
Out of?
43.
I should know that by now, shouldn't I? Okay. Right. Although we do need a bit of time to spend on this. Maybe we can go back afterwards. Well, I'll leave you that opportunity in the Q&A at the end. Okay. Love's Martyr. This is The Fate of the Phoenix. This is a collection of poems by different writers of the age, Christopher Marlowe and all of these guys. Shakespeare also contributed a poem to it. And I haven't read them all. I gather they're sort of the flames of love and all this kind of thing. Fine, if you're into that. Okay, whatever, right? And the Phoenix, Shakespeare contributed a poem to the collection of poems. His poem is called The Phoenix and the Turtle. Turtle meaning a turtle dove. Okay, so two birds. The phoenix, of course, is the legendary mythical bird that dies in flames and then is reborn from the ashes. Okay, but Shakespeare contributes a poem that has just puzzled people for years because it is so unusual. Now, I will spend a lot of time on this because I think it's worthwhile. So we're going to read it through, work out what it's on about, and then I'll show you what it really means, I think, a little bit, I hope. Okay? So this is his poem. It begins, "Let the bird of loudest lay on the sole Arabian tree, herald sad and trumpet be, to whose sound chaste wings obey. But thou, shrieking harbinger, foul procurer of the fiend, augur of the fever's end, to this troop come thou not near. From this session interdict every fowl of tyrant wing, save the eagle, feathered king, keep the obsequy so strict. Let the priest, in surplice white, that defunctive music can be the death-divining swan, lest the requiem lack his right, and thou, treble-dated crow, that thy sable gender mak'st with the breath thou giv'st and tak'st, mongst our mourners shalt thou go. Here the anthem doth commence. Love and constancy is dead. Phoenix and the turtle fled in a mutual flame from hence. So they loved, as love in twain, had the essence but in one, two distincts, division none, number therein love was slain. Hearts remote yet not asunder, distance, and no space was seen, twixt the turtle and his queen, but in them it were a wonder. So between them love did shine, that the turtle saw his right, flaming in the phoenix sight. Either was the other's mine. We need to go on for the rest of the poem. Good, thank you. Property was thus appalled that the self was not the same. Single nature's double name, neither two nor one was called. Reason in itself confounded, saw division grow together to themselves, yet either neither simple were so well compounded that it cried, how true a twain seemeth this concordant one. Love hath reason, reason none, if what parts can so remain. Whereupon it made this threen, to the phoenix and the dove co-supremes, and stars of love as chorus to their tragic scene, threnos. Beauty, truth and rarity, grace in all simplicity, here enclosed in cinders lie. Death is now the phoenix nest, and the turtle's loyal breast to eternity doth rest. Leaving no posterity, 'twas not their infirmity, it was married chastity. Truth may seem, but cannot be. Beauty brag, but 'tis not she. Truth and beauty buried be. To this urn let those repair that are either true or fair, for these dead birds sigh a prayer. Okay. Right, this is to help me as much as you. So, what is really going on? First of all, for a poem about the phoenix, the whole point of the phoenix as distinct from any other bird is what? It rises again from the ashes. Okay, where does that happen here? It doesn't. That's very unusual. Where's the rebirth? Secondly, we don't even see the phoenix dying. We gather at the start of the poem, she's already dead. So it doesn't begin with the death, it begins after the death has already happened. Let the bird of loudest lay on the sole Arabian tree herald. So what's happening? There's a meeting of birds in the forest, and they're gathering together to have a funeral, because two of them have died. Two of their number have died, so the birds are getting together in the forest to have a funeral, and then we get a bit about, let the birds know, tell them, there's this one who's the herald, they're going to gather them together, we don't want this guy turning up, don't tell him about it, okay. And they're going to have this funeral for the birds, and then we get a sort of poem within inside a poem, or a song within inside a song. It says, here the anthem doth commence. So, okay, this is the start of an anthem now. Maybe that's the funeral anthem, perhaps. Okay. Love and constancy is dead. Phoenix and the turtle fled in a mutual flame from hence. So there's something mutual. It's a sort of mutual death, or they died in a mutual flame. So that's unusual. The phoenix died in a flame, but a mutual flame with the turtle dove. And love and constancy is dead. So those two were the example, the gold standard of love and constancy. Marital fidelity. They're married, by the way. You notice we gather that on the way through. And there's two of them, but there's really only one of them because they're so close. They're one even though they're two, and they're two but they're one. So again, it's an idea of sort of conjugal fidelity. Number there in love was slain. Distance and no space was seen. What on earth does that mean? It means there was a distance between them, but there wasn't because they were so close they were one even though they were two. Okay. In fact, I'm sure they weren't the first ones to come up with this, but maybe, and Hugh Ross Williamson has the answer in here, sort of, partially, and he quotes the Countess de Chambrun. There's the famous painting of the 40 Martyrs, which I'm going to come back to, which you might have seen a moment ago. I think somebody already knew the answer to this. This is an article, I had a certain amount of difficulty getting it from the TLS. It's from 2003, the Times Literary Supplement. Another Turn for the Turtle. John Finnis and Patrick Martin. Interestingly enough, neither of whom is anything to do with English literature. One, I think, works in the oil industry. He's an American, and the other is an Australian, and he's like a professor of jurisprudence at a university or something like that. So complete outsiders and amateurs, in other words. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, it's very long, very interesting, and I think thoroughly convincing. Here is what they say. The bird of loudest lay is William Byrd. Now, the poem, by the way, is about the death of St. Anne Line. You might have noticed on the title page of Love's Martyr that I showed you earlier on, the date at the bottom was 1601. It was published in the summer, I think June or July 1601. Okay? Anne Line was martyred in the early weeks of 1601. In fact, she was captured at Candlemas. The Jesuits, she was a married lady whose husband had been sent into exile for being a Catholic, Richard Lyne. He had to go and live the rest of his life in Belgium, and for the rest of their lives they had to remain faithful to each other because they were married and they physically didn't see each other again for their whole lives. Each of them was from a very strongly Protestant family. St. Anne Line, her maiden name was Hyam. And her father was very wealthy. Where did he get his wealth? Plundering the monasteries. He nicked it off the church, basically. So understandably, I suppose, in one sense, the parents were not very impressed when each of them became Catholic and married each other. And it was a good, holy marriage and a very strong marriage, and there was a great deal of love and affection there. He got sent into exile for being a Catholic, I think probably in the early part of Elizabeth's reign when it was still fairly light sentences, but he couldn't come back into the country, it would have been treason, and she couldn't leave. So what did she do? She dedicated herself to the secret apostolate, to these priests coming over, and she effectively became a housekeeper for them, and also her house was where they said Mass and so on and so forth. Okay? The bird of loudest lay is William Byrd. This is the funeral for Anne Line. When she was executed at Tyburn, Father Parsons, I think it was, managed to get hold of her body, and then they buried it at midnight secretly because it would have just been thrown out. So they actually gave it a Catholic burial, but it had to happen at night without, so they didn't get caught. Okay, William Byrd maybe wrote a motet or something like that. Notice he's a herald, but he's also a trumpet. Okay. The Arabian tree, by the way, is a palm tree, and the palm branch is the symbol of martyrdom. St. Anne Line herself, if you see a statue, she'll be carrying a palm branch. That means she died a martyr. So that's the Arabian tree. And who are they summoning? To whose sound chaste wings obey. And chaste, of course, means pure, unadulterated, the true religion. But it's also a Shakespearean pun. It means chaste ED. They are being chaste. There was no actual police force in those days. It would be a local government guy with a bunch of soldiers. They were referred to as the poursuivants, the ones who would break in and arrest everybody. Poursuivants means pursuers, chasers. So the chaste wings, the Catholics who are being chased down and hunted down, they're the ones who are going to gather. Now, I don't know who this is referring to. A harbinger means the same as the augur of the fever's end. In other words, the one who and precurra means the same thing, the one who runs ahead. Presumably, this is what it looks like to me. Come thou not, you're not allowed. There's one guy that they don't want turning up to any of these secret Catholic functions, and he's not with the authorities, but he's been to Mass with us a few times in different places, and do you know what? It's beginning to get a bit suspicious. Every time this guy shows up, everyone gets arrested. So he's an augur, he's bad news, right? Whoever he is, I don't know who he is. He's a foul precurra of the fiend and an augur of the fever's end. Well, the fever ends when you die, right? Don't come, and notice he's not only not allowed to come to it, he's not allowed near it. We don't want you coming near. Okay, from this session interdict, and interdict means forbid. Who's not allowed to come to this session? Every fowl of tyrant wing. Fowl means a bird, and tyrant means a king. Tyrannos in Greek means king, okay? So any bird that's connected to the crown, anyone who's connected to the court of Elizabeth, we don't want them here, apart from the eagle-feathered king. So maybe there's somebody at the court of Elizabeth who somehow manages to get away with being at court, but really he's one of us in his sympathies. Possibly the Earl of Southampton. I don't know who the eagle feathered king is. This is also a sort of play on words. Every fowl of tyrant wing. Notice the words fowl and tyrant are next to each other, although they're not referring to the same thing. Elizabeth is a foul tyrant, okay? We don't want them coming. And an obsequy, of course, is a funeral, a requiem. Keep it so strict means don't tell anyone. So it's a secret requiem. Okay, let the priest in surplice white that defunctive music can. Defunctive means death, death divining swan, and a requiem. And by the way, there's no such thing as a Protestant requiem. Well, maybe there are some Anglicans now who pretend to do it, but certainly in Shakespeare's day, that's not a Protestant thing. A requiem is a Catholic word, it's a Latin word apart from anything else. Okay, death divining swan. Notice it's a bird again, but there was this sort of, I suppose, old wives' tale that swans, at the moment they die, they open their mouths and sing a song. But notice it's death, it's defunctive, it's death, and it's requiem, but it's also a musical requiem. Again, I think probably William Byrd. The treble-dated crow, they say, is Father Henry Garnet, S.J. How they worked out that it was him specifically, I don't remember, although I think he was one of the priests that Anne Line sort of lived with and cooked for and that kind of thing. And a crow is a sort of slang, a nickname for a Jesuit, because they wore, obviously not in England when they were in disguise, but when they could, you know, on the continent, they wore a cassock that had these sort of bits that hung off it, a bit like black wings. So a nickname for a Jesuit is a crow. And sable gender, sable just means, I think, black. Is that right? I think so. With the breath thou givest and takes, amongst our mourners shalt thou go. I'm not sure about this, but it sounds to me like one of the Jesuits is going and hearing confessions while the actual burial or requiem or whatever is taking place. Okay. Then we get this sort of two-in-one bit, and it's also it's almost a little bit metaphysical. People were very, very puzzled by this. Had the essence but in one, two distincts, division none. Distance and no space was seen. Now we know what it means. They're a married couple, so they're two different people, but really they're one. Okay? Makes sense. Our Lord says the two become one flesh, etc. Okay, fine. And the distance, of course, he's in Belgium, she's here in London. But they, Finis and Martin, they refer to, it's not exactly a word-for-word quotation, but it's near enough. They refer to Euclid's geometry, and it's his definition of a line. Two distinct points, no division, distance but no space between the two of them. It's Euclid's definition of a line. Yeah. So between them love did shine. They loved each other so much that, what? Result clause. The turtle saw his right flaming in the phoenix sight. Richard Lyne's father was so incensed when he became a Catholic that he cut him out of his will completely, and he was the eldest son, so he was due to get everything, and he deliberately left everything to the younger brother, and Richard Lyne got nothing at all. So his right can be read as his birthright, his inheritance. He saw the whole thing go up in flames. And in fact, his father wrote to him on his deathbed and in fact, no, I think he called him and he went to see him and he said basically, you need to be a Protestant or I'm giving you nothing. And Richard Lyne's response was, if I'm offered the world or Christ, then I choose to turn down the world and accept Christ. Right answer. Okay, I approve. But he lost everything. It went up in flames. The turtle dove, of course, is Richard, and the phoenix is St. Anne Line, if you haven't worked that out by now. Either was the other's mind, so they literally are left with each other and nothing else. Same thing happened to Anne Line. She was completely disowned by her family. So they had each other and nothing else. And of course, later on, they didn't even have each other. Either was the other's mine is another pun. It's another play on words, because a mine is what you dig something out of. It's where you get you mine your resources out of the ground, okay? So that each one is the source of the other's strength. They can keep going. But that's all they've got left is each other. It's really beautiful. Yeah, there we go. I don't appear to have highlighted this, and I'm not entirely sure I can tell you what all of it means, but let's have a very... well, for one thing, the Thranos, we now get another poem within a poem within a poem, okay? So we get a personification of reason that says, how true a twain seemeth this concordant one. thereupon it composed this threne. Okay, and then we get a 3-line. So what's happening? We've gone from 4 lines to 3. Again, it's a Shakespearean sort of joke. It's a line is missing. Yeah. And then, of course, at the end, rather like the ending of the Tempest, let your indulgence set me free. For these dead birds, sigh a prayer. I'm sure you guys all know this. There's no doubt at all about it. Praying for the dead is one of the things that the Protestants really rail against. It's a Catholic doctrine. There is just no sliver of possibility, if you're a Protestant, that you can even contemplate praying for the dead. But that's the very last line. For these dead birds, sigh a prayer. Okay, there we go. I'm sure. Finally, look at this picture. Now, there are the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. I'm ashamed to say I can name less than half of them. The Carthusians saying Mass are St. John Horton and the other 2 companions. St. Philip Howard is always easy to spot because he's dressed as a nobleman. There's his ruff, there's his sword, and his dog. Actually, it wasn't his dog. There was a stray dog in the prison, I think, that he befriended, and it used to go between him and Robert Southwell, between their prison cells, and they could pass each other's notes and that kind of thing. And there are 3 women among the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. Now, does anybody happen to know which one is St. Anne Line? That narrows it down, 3 out of the 40.
On the far left, closest?
Far left or closest?
Closest.
Yeah, you're quite right. That's her there. Now, can you see what there is perched on her arm? It's a little bird. It's a turtle dove. So somebody knew all along what the meaning of that poem was, I think. This painting it's about 200 years old. So I probably, again, should have looked this up. If I'd prepared this thoroughly enough, I would have done, who the artist was, but somebody obviously knew all along. There's St. Anne Line. Why's she got a turtle dove on her arm? I think we've just seen why. So that's Shakespeare's poem there. Okay. I haven't even begun to do justice to this topic. So let me apologise once again. Does anybody have any questions?